is exciting about this topic, because normally you probably wouldn't use that adjective to describe this process, is that we really have some powerful tools available to us to make this a much easier process, which oftentimes is manual and or we're just not doing it. So we'll be excited to take you through today's content. And bear with me 1 second. All right. And my slide should advance from an agenda standpoint. We'll talk just a little bit about the current climate and kind of the cost dilemma and some of the challenges that we're facing today. And then what I want to spend the majority of my time on is showing you different cost management solutions, profitability solutions using the Oracle EPM tools. So we'll jump in and talk about TDABC, which not a lot of folks are doing, but there's some real value add in that particular costing approach. And what you will see is that with an enabling technology is not as hard as you think it might be. We'll also just talk about the traditional costing approach as well. We'll conclude, open up for questions and answers. The overall kind of theme of what I want you guys to kind of remember as we go through these slides is really these solutions that we're walking through, and these processes. We've got enabling technologies to provide visibility. They're very flexible and agile. They are scalable across our hospital systems and secure. So with that, we'll jump into the detail. From a current climate standpoint, I'm not really going to talk about that because Edward talked about that for about an hour this morning. And again, we've heard some really good information and sharing in the session so far. We're going to continue to talk about that as the sessions go on today. Again, we're all trying to figure out this COVID-19 scenario. Even before that, the cost of healthcare was rising. Our consumer demand and expectations are increasing, and customers want faster, better experiences for lower costs. We are seeing a ton of medical advances. We've got an aging population that is we're needing to take care of. Regulatory requirements and changes. So again, a lot of different kind of aspects and changes that are going on today. And this is just kind of another slide that talks a little bit about that, some of the industry changes. Again, when it comes to a cost perspective, identifying our true costs of providing services is really important. And it's important that we're able to identify that so that we can get the appropriate reimbursements for those costs. Lots of consolidations and mergers. I know we have a couple of clients that have been very acquisitive pre-COVID-19 and are leveraging these Oracle EPM technologies to very quickly consolidate, map and get those new targets in, be able to do scenario modeling and what ifing, and if we do make these acquisitions, what does that do to our market share, to our financials, and then being able to again address the number of consumer changes that are going on. We also have a data explosion scenario going on. So there's just with the advent of all of these technologies and systems, EMR systems, Internet of Things, big data. So there's a ton of data out there, and there's really good information if we can somehow navigate it, summarize it, visualize it so that we can make sense of it. So that's some of the story that we'll talk about today. From a cost management perspective, some of the kind of key aspects related to our increasing healthcare costs is oftentimes we're maybe not managing our labor as well as we could be. We have inefficiencies in our supply chain, and we maybe don't necessarily have the best patient workflow. I actually experienced this yesterday when I took my father to a doctor's appointment, and you can see even just as a consumer some efficiencies that maybe could be gained. So being able to have visibility into that is very important. You can't really solve the problem unless you have that visibility. So again, with these issues, kind of the associated costs of, our high labor costs, our compensation expenses for our healthcare labor that are kind of the biggest element that we have to do, making sure that they've got really good productivity levels. The cost of employing physicians is important. The cost of our technology. So from a new technology standpoint, I know a lot of you guys have been implementing new systems, whether it's EMR systems, new ERP systems, and then of course APM, planning forecasting solutions as well. And oftentimes, especially with EMRs, again, those were very significant investments on your part. And I'm not sure if all of you guys are seeing that the benefit you know, of those systems and kind of what was promised out of that versus the cost investment that you've made. So a lot of things that are going on from a cost perspective, but there's just the risk of the whole reimbursement process, which we've, you know, highlighted a little bit ago. And then again, costs related to poor patient workflow and having patients, you know, a kind of longer lengths of stay where maybe we can reduce some of that, reduce some of the costs for our patients. I think I had one other point. I just want to make sure I hit my notes. So how do we solve the problem? And really, I think it's this visibility, this transparency into the costs and being able to navigate and understand them so that we can refocus our labor and really have the right people doing the right tasks to support our patient services. Managing our employed physicians, you know, our providers are very competitive. So creating maybe some provider dashboards to kind of understand where they fit into the quality of care and the cost of delivering services. Standardizing where possible across your services and departments can help streamline both from process cost standpoint, from a supply chain standpoint, and just having the ability to understand and control costs and then improve the overall patient encounter. So the questions that you guys are answering, the answers that you're looking for is, you know, what are my costliest processes? What are those services that we're providing that are the most expensive? And is there a way that I can reduce those costs while still maintaining the quality of care that we want to deliver for patients? How are your costs trending over time? How do I compare to other services, other centers in my institution? In addition to this, are resources overutilized or are they underutilized? And how can I maximize the employees to their fullest skill set so that I've got the right employees doing the right tasks? So in order to answer these questions, we've got to be able to get to a cost level that is a more granular level than what is tracked by our ERP and our transaction systems. So what that means is we've got to do some allocation type costing methodologies. So the first methodology that I want to walk you guys through, because I think this one is the kind of the least used, maybe, well, I don't know if it's least used, but a lot of you guys are doing traditional costing. We saw that in the survey where you're allocating based on work RVUs down to provider and services. So that still has a place, and we'll talk about that in just a bit. But I did want to make sure we got to talk about TDABC, which is kind of a different approach to getting a different perspective and maybe some more actionable type intelligence that you can do to improve your processes as a hospital. So TDABC is a bottoms-up approach to costing out our patient care services. It requires a process mapping exercise and then combining that with resource level costing. So definitely have to have kind of buy-in from your different administrative groups as well as the operations teams in order to make this approach work. From a simplified standpoint, we're essentially going to allocate our enterprise support costs down to a resource level. We then are going to identify how much time a resource spends on a particular process, and we basically allocate the cost of that resource times the time they spend to get to our ultimate cost of delivering a particular service, providing a particular process or service care for a patient. So from a conceptual model standpoint, we're taking our cost data from the GL, our expenses. We're taking some of the costs related to our assets. We've got some very expensive equipment that we want to track across the different patient delivery services that we're doing. We also then take in the volumes, how many times we're actually performing these activities, and then pull that together into our process maps. So what resources are doing what tasks to help us ultimately come to kind of the true cost of delivering a particular service to a patient. There are some different components within TDABC, and I won't go through all of these. in a super granular level of detail, mainly just to note we want to kind of standardize where we can across a set of activities. We want to identify the right level of resources, the right level of activities to perform this TDABC process. So we want to make sure we have visibility, but we want to keep it scalable at the same time and consistent so that we can compare costs across processes and costs across our different departments and services. Other key components, so we have our costs. So essentially what we're doing is trying to fully allocate the cost of our resources, taking all of our enterprise support costs and allocating that down. We then want to understand the time it takes our resource to perform a particular activity. So this involves taking time from the operations, and they've got to just, you know, touch point, how long am I spending on each one of these activities? It's also important, like how much time am I actually spending versus how much time should I be spending on this, and are there room for improvements? And we have the ability to kind of capture and do comparisons of those time estimates. Figuring out the capacity for a resource, so how much time does, you know, a nurse actually have in their day to help deliver patient care services. You may have a doctor who has maybe 20% of their time, 50% of their time dedicated to research. So really understanding the capacity and then how that ties into their capacity cost rate. So with that, I'm going to kind of jump into I always have a lot of slides because I want to make sure you guys have the fundamentals of what's going on behind the scenes. Essentially what we're going to do is kind of in our TDABC process, we're going to take all of those enterprise costs, we're going to allocate it down to a resource level. So maybe down to a particular job code by department. So head and neck center, MD, a head and neck center nurse. We may have our nursing assistants. We have our admins, our coordinators. We've got all different kinds of resources that are taking place in part in the activities to deliver patient care services. So we allocate all of our enterprise costs, our IT expense, facilities expense, some of that we're tracking at a direct level, but we have a lot of supporting facilities expense that needs to get allocated out. Accounting, finance. We also have departments that are maybe patient facing, but they're more in a support fashion to our direct patient facing departments. So we need to allocate all those costs out so we get to a true fully allocated cost rate per resource. And then we can calculate the capacity cost rate. From there, we have our operations estimate for our set of activities and processes that we're delivering, treatments that we're delivering. What are the times for each step in the process? And again, kind of standardization of those tasks, the right level of detail to provide visibility, but then be able to track and compare that information. From there, we can calculate the cost of doing providing a single service, and then we can then add in the volumes, how many times we're actually doing that particular activity to get to our total cost. So those are the basic steps, and I have kind of a comparison, you know, of your key elements of TDABC versus traditional. I'm going to cover this slide in a little bit more detail when we get back to traditional. So here's what this looks like. So Interrel has a pre-built kind of framework to help develop your time-driven activity-based costing solution. And so again, you log into the cloud and you have the ability to navigate, and we've got pre-built flows to help users through all of the steps that we just talked about. So if I kind of start with the end in mind, what TDABC is able to do is provide the answers of what is the cost to deliver a particular service, the true cost with the fully allocated resources out based on my set of assumptions. So we can actually see the cost for my particular department. I can see it for a single individual process cost. I can look at the volumes and counts of how many times we're doing that, and then looking at our total costs. And so immediately we can see again, in our very simple example and kind of made up data, our consult visits have the highest level of cost. What's going on there? Is there some room for improvement that we can do? So again, having the ability to answer this question and really see the cost, not only in like a grid report fashion, but able to see it and very quickly identify issues from a visualization standpoint. We also, with the TDABC approach, we're able to understand potential over-under capacity issues. So we can see, if I look across all of my processes, and I can figure out and calculate my available capacity versus the expected minutes that we're going to use across these volumes, I can look to see, okay, from an RN and an MD perspective, we're over capacity. There's an issue. So do I need to reallocate resources? Do we need to hire resources? Do we need to bring in some contract? So there's some immediate visualization of understanding there's an issue. We also see that our LVNs maybe have some additional time. So potentially those LVN can actually, instead of hiring an RN, maybe we can reallocate some tasks to the LVN to reduce the time required from an RN perspective, and we have nursing assistants or other resources that can do some of those tasks. So again, providing kind of visibility where we see we've got room to be able to take on some additional work, or where other resources may need some help. So that's the ultimate goal, is being able to see this for a single department or service center, and across your hospital system. So part of the power of the EPM cloud is that this particular view, these views and these dashboards, I can look at it at a very granular level. I can also see it at summarized department, division, hospital levels as well. So just to walk you through a few of the kind of the screens to take you through like what TDABC would look like from a system perspective. Again, what we're doing here, and we've got some screenshots of the application, and I'll maybe toggle over in just a bit. But we have the ability to take our cost data. We've got direct data that we know is directly tied into the patient-facing services, but there's a lot of enterprise support costs. So if you kind of look midway down the screenshot, we have our enterprise support costs. We've got operations support, and then there's maybe some direct support. Those costs need to be allocated out by a series of drivers. So those drivers could be FTE, it could be square footage, it could be average compensation, it could be direct costs. There's a lot of, again, whatever driver you would want to allocate that by, we could do that. So we're taking these enterprise operations support level costs, allocating it down to patient-facing departments. So these are kind of the full steps and stages. Now, you could, in this example, I have up to 9 different stages. You could have 3 stages. You could have 2 stages. So we have some flexibility. Depends on how you want to break up the allocations. So here we can allocate enterprise support costs, then we do our operation support, then we do direct. And then once we have those allocated to those department levels, then we're able to allocate down to the resource level. So again, I can assign different drivers, and we've got flexibility on what those drivers are so that we ultimately get down to allocated data at a resource level. So if I show, this is kind of a summary screen. So we would see some of those, the direct costs have been allocated out. We see those going across the top in this form where I have my cost drivers, I've got my direct department cost, and then we start seeing the allocated enterprise support cost, the allocated operational support, allocated direct cost. So we can see those out, and we can even trace how each one of those cost elements were allocated down. We've got that visibility. That's absolutely something the patient-facing departments are going to ask, is like, whoa, where are all these costs coming from? Being able to answer that question so they can see, here's why you are receiving these costs. This is why, why you're getting this amount of allocation down to your particular department. So ultimately what you're able to do, again, the idea is we're getting a fully allocated cost for each one of those resources, whether it's a labor resource, capital resource, or another resource. So we can see the fully allocated cost, fully loaded cost by resource. So for an LVN, it's 151,000. In this view, we're kind of looking at it at a quarter level. So we can do this on a quarterly basis. You could do this on a monthly basis. It could be an annual basis. I think at least quarterly would make sense to touch base so that you're doing a continual improvement process. We can see the fully allocated cost for a head and neck center MD. Hopefully that makes sense. And again, if you guys have questions, please post them, and we'll jump back through at the end. So underneath the covers, we can leverage SBASE and profitability and cost management to help us manage some of these allocations. And my main point here is that you guys likely have some maybe black box type allocation systems where you kind of put in some numbers and something generates out. You're not really sure how, what happened, and or again, these can be very complicated. And again, different drivers based on different departments. There's different rules, multiple stages. So what's great about PCM is we have a GUI driven interface to be able to define the allocations. And it's as simple as defining, here's my source data to allocate, here's my destination, and you're kind of pointing to the different elements of your organization. So this particular entity, this particular location, this particular department, maybe cost pool is going to allocate down to this particular destination. We then define the drivers, and then there's some other parameters. So what you see through these screenshots is there's no, in these examples, there's no like complicated coding or complicated scripting that's going on. We've got a GUI interface to define these allocations, and then we can have some flexibility in how we run these rules. So we can run a single rule, we can run a group of rules, sequence of rules, or we can run everything. So again, GUI interfaces is really designed to be kind of the business, a set of group, maybe your FP&A, maybe another group in your organization. That can run this, and you don't have to have an IT technical person behind the scenes to create and run these allocations. There's also a lot of features. We could spend a whole hour talking about profitability and cost management, the tool itself, but being able to copy rules across periods, you can track and have different allocation rules for different scenarios. So if we wanted to see, well, if we allocate based on this driver, what does that look like versus if we allocate on a different driver, being able to compare those. So we can copy allocation rules across a point of view very easily, and then tweak and update those rules. The other benefit, as I mentioned, and hopefully, and again, it's probably hard to digest in the time frame that we have, kind of the visibility, but you're able to see the ins and outs of these allocations. So that's very important, and be able to answer those questions, have the visibility and the transparency. So there's a rules balancing report that we can use. There's also kind of a trace allocations where we can just click and drag in and see. And then of course, you see some different Excel screenshots as well. So I could do this in nicely formatted reports. I can drill in and connect to these solutions and see this in an Excel format. So lots of different ways to be able to trace these allocations and how they're allocated out. Once I have my fully allocated cost at a resource level, I can calculate the cost capacity rate. Now I need some assumptions, right? I need to have some default assumptions on the number of work days, the clinical hours per day, and what their practical capacity percentage is. So again, we can define that at a global level. We can also define that by resource. So here we're looking at, for a particular department, how many FTE do we have for that department for the particular resource? What are the work days? What are the average days unavailable? So that could be PTO or sick days. What's their level of operational effort? And then the hours per day and practical capacity percent. So you kind of need all those assumptions so that you can figure out what are the available minutes per resource. And then again, we can take that fully allocated cost divided by the available minutes to get to our cost per minute for resource. So that's kind of the key component there. You may have resources that are split across departments. So these solutions allow you to account for, this particular nurse, for whatever reason, spends 80% of her time in this department, maybe 20% of her time in another department. So you can have that granularity if you need it. So at that point, we now get to the process mapping stage for time-driven activity-based costing. A lot of times these process maps are in Visio. You may have identified, here's the steps, here's the resource, how much time is allocated. And this is great and it helps you understand from a visual perspective, but that's not going to really help us calculate the cost to deliver that particular service. So we kind of take that same information and we can put it into a grid matrix form that again, we can see in the system. You also can provide links into those Visio documents, so we'll see that in just a bit. So again, here's kind of what that Visio flow looks like. What we do in the TDABC solution, again, is we've defined a set of activities and a standard set, and users can insert in new tasks into these process maps. But at the kind of the height of it, we have our point of view. So we're looking at Q1, we're looking at FY20 for the head and neck service department. What's the particular process that we're gonna be entering in kind of our process times for? So here I'm looking at super simple example, new patient visit MD for the head and neck center. And then you can see the different tasks or steps that I've input in for this particular process map. I then also see the resource that's performing that activity. So then I can determine the probability of that activity, the time spent on that activity, and then we can calculate the cost of the process map by multiplying our capacity cost rate times the expected activity resource minutes to get to our total process cost. So again, then all I have to do is roll that up, and I can see for a new patient visit with a MD focus is $97.05. So again, this is all kind of made up data. Notice you can group activities into, you know, pre-encounter, encounter, post-encounter, and then be able to do subtotals and analytics that way. And again, we try and standardize, simplifies the tasks. We can have starting point tasks so that you don't have to create this from scratch. You can kind of have a guided standard, and then folks can tweak and update these time estimates. So this is where I think a lot of the pushback we get sometimes with TDABC is like, oh, this is going to take too long. But honestly, it's taking this time once a quarter kind of to revisit these processes and these steps so that you can have the visibility and then address maybe some of the issues that you're having with labor management, poor patient workflow. So it's worth the time to work with your operations to kind of, you know, take a couple of days and track these different processes and see how long, you know, resources are spending on each one of these steps, update the information in the system. You know, these are GUI formats that work great on a tablet. So you just bring the iPad with you and can kind of update your process maps on the fly, commit that in, and then you'll be able to view this information. So this is at the heart of it. We've got our capacity cost rate. We've got our expected time to get to, you know, the cost to provide a single service. And from there, we can just subtotal things up and then start to really understand, you know, how many minutes am I spending? If I add in my volume, so you can have likely an integration, pulling in those process map counts or those volumes, but users can enter it in the system, and then it can calculate how much time we are spending on these various different activities. You can look at it from a fully allocated perspective, and then if users want to see it from a direct, if they just want to see the direct cost, they can view that as well. We can see that system. So again, at that point, we're able to kind of use summary level information at a resource level, activity resource level, at a department, rolled up department, and again, answer those questions of, you know, what is my true cost to provide this particular service to patients? Again, we can link back to, insert in links back to those Visio diagrams. We can have, you know, a lead contact that we could see. We can also compare this information across centers and departments. The other question that is answered by collecting and planning this information is the over-under capacity that we looked at the beginning. So understanding where you may have resource issues, can you change up your particular process maps to address some of the red that we're seeing here on our dashboard. Other capabilities with the system, being able to do what-ifing, so creating multiple versions. You can kind of change up FTEs and resources to see how that has what that impact has, both from a process cost standpoint as well as a resource standpoint. Now, the next question you guys may have, and we get this a lot of times, is, okay, so then how do I get it down to a patient level? And for the most part, what we recommend, and this is not an absolute, but that in the EPM cloud, we're looking at our cost and profitability, you know, by provider, by department, by service code or CDM, by DRG. We're not actually looking at, you know, patient Tracy McMullen in the EPM cloud. So we're doing the more complex allocations here in the EPM cloud at, again, it's still a pretty granular level, but not at the individual patient level ID. So usually what happens at that point when we're getting down to a patient level, transaction level, oftentimes healthcare systems have specific data marts that have got all of the HIPAA compliance rules, regulations, security defined. So my recommendation is that we take this cost information, you know, by service, by DRG, by treatment, and then we can map that into the patient level, cloud warehouse, wherever that may reside. And again, some cases that's cloud, Oracle Cloud ADW, and you can do that there. But again, when we get to provider, like when we're at a transaction level, patient level, and we're really wanting to kind of map that data, a lot of times that's taking place not in the EPM cloud, but in a kind of a relational Oracle Cloud data warehouse Mart standpoint. And again, what you can do is take that cost data, allocate it down to a patient level, or just maybe assign the relationship so that you can see by patient the true cost to provide those services. And then again, Oracle Analytics is a great tool to then take kind of that granular level data and do various different visualizations. So with that, I think I'm going to go through my slides, and then I'm going to kind of switch over and kind of pull up the application if we have time. Mainly because sometimes switching the screens doesn't always work well. So comparing costing systems. So I just really focused on TDABC, but the traditional approach, you guys are doing that today. I think everyone's doing this today in some or fashion. It's more of a tops-down approach, and this is where we're fully absorbing all of the costs into clinical services, where TDABC it's more of a partial allocation, because some of those enterprise support costs aren't all going into direct facing. Costs are absorbed using, and how we're allocating is we're using revenue, we're using RVUs, work RVU to do some of those allocations. And again, it's not necessarily, as we see the cost of services changing, we don't really see the relationship to process changes. We, in this particular model, can't really account for capacity or the efficiency of resources very well. And it's a little bit more disconnected from an operations and process improvement perspective, where TDABC really focuses on, that patient flow and the optimal steps for your departments and services. So, the answer is, should I just completely switch over to TDABC? And the answer is no. Like, I think there's actually a place for both of these allocation options. So do both. And then now I know what you're saying, and because there are pros and cons to each one of these approaches, and they both provide different perspectives. So you're going to see some different information, and that's your whole goal, is to kind of get information to help you make decisions on how to improve, your cost management, how to improve your pricing, to make sure that things are, priced accordingly. But you're probably saying, well, wow, that would be a lot, because again, if you don't have an enabling technology, it is a very manual, and that would be very tough to do both. But again, the EPM Cloud has got some underlying tools that make this much easier than what you've had to face in the past. And I do recommend a phased approach. So again, you're not going to big bang try and do all of the different options at once, but you can set up different applications tailored to do these different approaches. Very easy, and kind of figure out which one makes the most sense. Oftentimes, from a TDABC perspective, you may pick, a couple of pilot departments or service centers to start with, and then roll out to the rest of the organization. Now, again, traditional support, traditional allocation methodologies are supported as well. And again, you can use profitability and cost management, kind of that GUI interface, to create rules. So similarly, we're probably still, similarly to TDABC, we're allocating out our enterprise support costs down to patient-facing departments. So we may have our IT admin, that's going to be allocated down maybe based on FTE or headcount. We've got our facilities, that's going to be allocated out based on square footage. So similar allocations to get to our patient-facing departments, but then at that point, we're ready to then do the allocations out, whether it's down to a DRG perspective, down to a provider perspective. Here we're seeing provider, where we're taking some of this expense data at no provider, and then we're allocating down to provider based on work RVU, and then we maybe have DRG expenses, which are at a no DRG level, and then allocating those down. So again, these are Excel views of data that's connected to our EPM applications from an allocation standpoint, and very powerful calculations so that ultimately we can answer the question and look at our margins, percentages by DRG, by provider, whatever we're, CPT code, whatever it is that we're allocating down to, we have the ability to see that, make sure. So here in this example, we see we actually have some negative margin percentages, and that's something we need to look at. So is there something we can do to improve from a cost perspective, and or, is there something we need to adjust from a pricing standpoint? Then we have the ability to do different analytics on all of this data. So we can do this in EPM Cloud. We can also do this in Oracle Analytics and create different visualizations to see, looking at our expenses by DRG, we can look at our margins. So again, this is where we see, I don't know if you guys can see my mouse. We see the red and the purple. From a margin perspective, that's a negative number, that's bad. And basically that we're not getting any margin, no margin contribution from those particular DRGs. We can also, here I've got kind of a recorded demo just to show you the ease of Oracle Analytics and the visualization capabilities, dragging and dropping to view data. So if we wanted to, look at the margin by our different providers. So it's a matter of we import or connect to our sources, and then we can see margin by providers, and if some of our providers are looking great, some are really bad and actually have negative margins. So we can then add in DRG for that particular provider so we can get a little bit more detail. And then we can change the different charting options. So we can go from a bar chart to a stacked chart in a very easy fashion. So here I can copy this visualization and then I can paste it in. And then we can, start to change up some different pieces. So if we want to switch around and see kind of the flip side and understand and look at it more from a DRG perspective, again, we can see some of our red DRGs, which again were those ones with a negative margin, we can see that coming through, and then we can focus to see some of those details. So again, it's kind of a click and drag interface, and then you can very quickly and easily see the presentation of those numbers. You could also, if you're looking at this from a total hospital system, you could then also then filter down based on your different departments and see this visibility. The ultimate goal and the ultimate benefit is to answer questions fast and see issues and be able to address them very quickly. Okay. The last kind of feature function tool, which Opal is going to be talking about a little bit later on today, is using narrative reporting to help explain, what's going on today, the impacts of coronavirus or any other things that are going on in the institution. What narrative reporting allows you to do is create, we saw kind of the analytic self-service, we can also create these nicely formatted reports with content narrative from our management, and then these reports can also have grids of numbers that are connected live into our systems, so into our profitability systems, into our reporting and financial systems, so that as the underlying data changes, we update some scenarios, maybe we're updating our delayed recovery. You actually, in narrative reporting, can just run a refresh and then it updates the content within these reports. So really reducing the time that it takes to communicate and explain what is going on in your environment. And again, that was just a teeny tiny preview of what Opal will highlight in her session a little bit later on this afternoon. So again, the ultimate goal, right? The ultimate goal of what we want to do is we want to improve our outcomes and we want to improve the quality of care, but we really need to focus on decreasing the quality of care. And we can't decrease the quality of care if we don't even know how much it costs, to deliver a particular service for a patient. So again, what what will help you guys in this journey and help you guys address the solution is an enabling technology. So again, Oracle EPM Cloud, Oracle Analytics, cloud-based solutions that you can take advantage of. There are best practice features and functions that come out of the box that you can use. Hopefully, and again, we glimpsed into kind of GUI-driven, business user-driven allocations. Under the covers, we have a really powerful calculation engine, fast reporting and analysis. So as soon as we run an allocation, being able to slice and dice and view that information, and then having it be scalable, right? So we want to be able to scale down to granular levels of data across our hospital systems. So down to those services and those treatments, and it can support that. Again, with connectivity into transaction level data, drill through back to transaction level data, drill back to patient level data where you need that. So with that, the last slide, and then I'm going to take just one quick moment. I'll kind of just live walk you through the cloud solution. I did want to note that we've got kind of a pre-built offering for profitability and cost management. So some of the things that I showed you today, Interrol's created a framework to really jumpstart our implementations, because these allocation projects, I mean, they can really extend out and be complicated. And what we like you guys to do and what we want you to do is kind of start simple. So we give you a framework so that you can get up and running and you can at least get some visibility with a little bit more standardized approach, a little bit more streamlined approach, you know, in 6 weeks or less. So you can like get up and running, and it may be a certain area, a certain department, but we've got the framework sort of like EBPCS delivers pre-built modules. We've developed this from a profitability standpoint and allocation. So I encourage you guys, if you're interested in this, reach out to info@nrl.com. If you want to see kind of more in-depth demo of how that would work, we would love to help you. So with that, I am going to switch over and just really quickly kind of give you just a live action shot of kind of what this looks like in the cloud. If you're new to the EPM cloud, again, the web, and again, everything that I show you here in the web, you can also kind of see and navigate from an Excel perspective. But we have these cards and clusters that can guide users through the process. So from a TDABC standpoint, this is where, again, we've got some pre-built dashboards. We can create any kind of presentations that make sense for your users. So, and hopefully it didn't time me out in that time frame. May take a second, but again, this is where we can view kind of the resource capacity over under, and we can see some of the formulas. So if you want to understand how is something calculated, we can click on the F and see the formulas. This is where, again, we can create different visualizations to understand resource capacity across a number of different versions. We can also look at process cost or service cost, be able to compare those side by side. And then we've got those different UIs where if we really want to understand and see and trace the allocations and see the visibility on how things are allocated down into a resource level. So this is where we were seeing kind of all the costs that have been allocated out.
Hey, Tracy?
So yes.
Hey, I think we lost your screen.
Oh, let's see. I didn't stop, but I'll try again.
Yeah, you.
Oh, man, so that means you didn't see any of the dashboards. All right. Okay. So
that's one of the best parts.
Yes, thank you. I know. So okay. So navigation and flows,
sorry,
cards.
Folks, it's tech.
And this is where again you can guide through the process. This is where we can see kind of some of those dashboards and visualizations, what are my, what's my most expensive process? What's my least expensive process, or service that we're delivering? But then if you then accumulate from a volume standpoint, what does that look like, right? And so that's where we can kind of see. We have our most expensive one. We don't do that very often, versus if we did this a whole lot, that's definitely like an opportunity to see what can we do to improve those costs. We can also, again, kind of view, and this is where you have that visibility into the cost allocations down to a resource level. So if we zoom in across our departments, and here I'm kind of looking at, again, I just have a couple of sample centers built, head and neck center and surgery, but imagine you're your system, you could also filter this view for a particular department. But this is where you can see your direct costs and your direct costs that you have maybe by a resource level, and then you see all of your allocated costs. So you've got that visibility in. We have the ability to view some of the resource assumptions to calculate our capacity cost rates. So we can see some of those assumptions. Here's where you see like maybe your MD is only 75% practical capacity, which will impact the calculation of his minutes, and then being able to track those process maps. So this just kind of a live view, so you can kind of see the clicks and kind of see, and as we, change some of these estimates, then that's going to update the underlying costs, the roll-up of the cost for delivering these particular services. And then this is just an example of Oracle Analytics. It used to be called the Data Visualization Desktop. I think now it's called Oracle Analytics Desktop. But this is where you can, create different analytics and kind of click and drag and create visualizations against your source, all of your various different data sources. So with that, I think we'll leave maybe 10 more minutes. Actually, I think I was probably supposed to finish a little bit longer. We'll open up for some questions, if there are any questions.
Yes, so yes, everyone can present their questions, and I would like to start with a question that I have, Tracy.
Yes.
I know that you were highly involved, the architect of this solution a few years ago, and I know that you've been curating it since then and migrating it, and it's gone to the cloud. It was an on-prem originally, and yes. I was wondering if you could speak to how this is evolving and how you were able to do new things with it as you brought it onto the cloud. I know these dashboards just look great, and I don't even think that was even part of it originally. Yes. And things like integrations and navigation flows. Can you just talk about how cloud is improving this?
Yeah, so cloud has really made this a slick tool. So when we were in on-prem world, it definitely worked, but there was some clunkiness to it that we're really able to eliminate from a cloud perspective. So one, just guiding users through this process and providing some easy navigation. So that's one right out of the box. With some of the cloud data integration tools, we have data management that can connect directly into whether it's EBS or on-premise ERP systems using the EPM data agent, or it's connecting into Fusion to pull in that data. We've got direct connect capabilities where we could do that in on-premise world, but it required some more building steps. We are also able to, just the user interface to be able to maintain these process maps has even significantly improved because the UIs are a little bit faster. So again, I don't have all the features turned on in this, but we have the ability, the user would have the ability to right click. So if they wanted to insert in a new task, a new resource, if they wanted to change this resource, kind of the navigation capabilities to maintain these process maps are greatly improved with some of the new features that are available in the cloud. Again, all the reporting, the dashboards that you mentioned, and then again, some of the reporting that Opal's going to talk a little bit later is a really powerful solution. And then this whole data visualization paradigm that didn't even exist. Like we could do it in SmartView, but again, it would just be grids of numbers, where here it's, really easy to kind of look at, kind of pulling in your data, and then just kind of immediately seeing visualization. So if you wanted to see, it creates a tile right off the bat. Notice that it kind of changes based on what I pull in. So I can very quickly see data and visualize data that this didn't exist before. And this is, I think, a game changer in helping us to be much more agile than what we did before.
Great, thank you. And while we're talking about reporting, we have a question about comparing what you're able to do with and without Oracle Analytics or Oracle Analytics Cloud. What can we do if we don't have that, and what does it add to our reporting capabilities if we do have the analytics product as well?
Sure. So right now there's a little bit of nuance kind of with the visualizations that you see here. The current, and this is changing, so that's why I say like right now, these dashboards and kind of visualizations are curated by a power user or an administrator. So it's not a self-service end user thing that you just saw me create from a data visualization perspective. However, Oracle is working on kind of a new dashboard designer that will allow more end user capabilities. So right now, that's one of the main differences is this is either power users are creating these visualizations or an administrator versus if you have DV, I can do whatever I want. Another difference is that these content and these dashboards are going to they're pulling data from the underlying cubes within this application. So if I had just an Excel spreadsheet, so we're in Corona times, and Bill kind of talked about this too, where like they needed to see something that was totally different. They needed to see it fast. And I have this Excel spreadsheet. Well, in order to kind of see that in this presentation in the EPM cloud, I would need to load that somewhere in my cube to be able to analyze it. So these data sets are kind of tied to the underlying cubes within this application. Where DV, if I wanted to add in a data set and I had just this Excel spreadsheet somewhere that I wanted to load in, I can navigate, pull in this Excel file. I think that one will work. And add this into my analysis and be able to visualize it. That's what Data Visualization Desktop does. So it can connect to more sources. It can combine many sources all together for these visualizations. So it's kind of taking your data visualization step one step further and being able to, again, self-service and user can do all of this. So let's say if this was more provider details, you could add this into the same analysis and then be off and running and starting to analyze the data.
So it sounds like if I've got time to curate and build and have power users do the reporting, then I can get away without the analytics. But if I need more agility and the ability for people to really have kind of more ad hoc visualization approach, then analytics is really going to add to that.
Yes, yeah. And again, it's not that these visualizations in the cloud, again, they kind of look alike. And then what's great is a lot of those visualizations in Oracle Analytics, actually now, I think as of the versions now, we don't have it set up just yet, but you can do this today where like if I create something in Oracle Analytics, I can actually surface that content here in the EPM cloud. But creating these visualizations and dashboards is super easy and like, you know, may take you anywhere from 2 minutes to 30 minutes, if you've got a really complicated something that you're wanting to see. So creating visualizations is not hard here. It's just you generally, at least the way the functionality is now, you generally don't roll that out to your 500 planning users. You've got a few power users in different departments that are creating these for them.
Great. Thanks, Tracy. And with that, the audience questions are exhausted and it looks like good timing. Going to give everybody just a few moments to take a break, and we're going to pick up at 2:30 Central Time and have an open Q&A panel with a number of our guests.